The future of human evolution. What do Simone Biles and David Bowie have in common with a puddle of primordial goo? They're all part of the same ridiculous, mind-bending story. Evolution. Over billions of years, life has shapeshifted from hot soup of amino acids into complex organisms we are today. And it did all this with no plan, no purpose, and a lot of mistakes. Evolution isn't trying to build a better you. It's just throwing spaghetti at the wall, and somehow we're what stuck. But what remains does so at a huge cost. So many trillions of failed experiments died so that we could survive. And this process will continue as long as we're susceptible to genetic mutations and environmental changes. So, what's next? Wings? Tails? Enormous alien heads and floppy ears? Let's fast forward a few 100,000 years and find out. But first, a few points on evolution. One of our biggest intuitive mistakes about evolution is believing it has a goal. You might see our ancestors increasing brain size and shrinking jaws and predict that we'll all improve into telepathic gray aliens in a few thousand years. But, as they say on Wall Street, past performance is no guarantee of future results. And as we'll see, there are quite a few things in common between the stock market and the random chaotic nature of our evolution. Evolution has no roadmap. It changes unpredictably based on time, chance, and the environment. This makes it more or less unpredictable, but we can still have a go. To make realistic guesses about humanity's evolutionary future, let's quickly recap a couple key processes. First, selection. A magic climate change floods the Netherlands. Suddenly, the Vissers family infamous genetic quirk, webbed feet, is perfect for swimming through Rotterdam's newly submerged streets. This once shunned family grows rapidly in popularity. Almost overnight, everyone wants a bit of the Vissers. Their genetic stock becomes highly prized, and soon webbed feet are everywhere. This isn't evolution responding to the flood. It's simply that the flood selected for something already present that worked well. But selection isn't the only player. Genetic drift is always in the background, subtly reshaping the gene pool. Thanks to the heroic, fish-fetching Vissers, even the Backer family, with their perfectly ordinary feet, survive comfortably. And without any pressure to evolve webbing or keep their toes intact, their once useful traits quietly fade. Use it or lose it is a tempting summary for this, but it's only half the story. Genetic drift doesn't just delete old traits, it also introduces weird new ones, purely by chance. As long as they're not helping or harming, neutral mutations can slip through the cracks, and whole populations can start to look a bit different. Finally, it's worth remembering that evolution only works on heritable traits. You can pay for surgery, wear whatever you like, even replace your legs with robot stilts. But if it's not in your DNA, evolution's not interested. It only plays the long game with what you pass on. So, to sum up, natural selection removes traits that directly interfere with reproduction. Genetic drift shuffles everything else, sometimes smoothing things out, sometimes introducing quirks. With those basics sorted, let's start wildly speculating about where evolution may take us next. Reliance on C-sections? As outstanding as modern medicine is in reducing human suffering and prolonging life, it has also removed selective pressure from the equation in many cases. It was natural selection that gave humans large brains and the big, bulbous, bobbly heads that surround them. Likewise, it was natural selection that gave women white hips for our bobblehead babies to fit through at birth. But selection really is a force against, rather than a force for. This is the dark side of natural selection, and it's the reason why, until very recently, one of the leading causes of human deaths was birth. In many, many cases, without medical intervention, humans failed to survive birth. Both mothers and babies would routinely die in the process, contributing to what was a 46% infant mortality rate even in the US just over 200 years ago. Combined with similar advancements in supportive medicine, C-sections have almost ended this phenomenon, and that number is now at under 4%. C-sections are now administered in as many as 1 in 3 births, and have saved countless lives and are one of the most incredible feats of modern medicine. But all that horrific suffering and death in childbirth was a necessary part of the selection process. It was removing people without the genetic traits to give birth to healthy babies, and would often remove their offspring in the process. This selected for women with hips more suited to the project at hand. With medicine taking over this role, there are now less selective pressures to pass on the genes for birthing hips. And if we look back at the use it or lose it concept of genetic drift, such hips will ultimately be lost. This is not going to be a problem as long as we have uninterrupted access to doctors, hospital, antibiotics, anesthetics, and medical education. On the other hand, this also allows for the heads of babies to get even bigger, as long as the rest of the female reproductive anatomy can allow for it. So humans may end up staying in the womb longer, growing freakishly large heads and evolving to have smaller hips. So while medicine reshapes our hips and heads, let's talk about something shaping our minds and behavior. Domestication. When we think of domestication, we have to think of dogs. Humans took a Pleistocene apex predator and bred it to fit into Paris Hilton's handbag. But this process of selection goes much farther than size and shape. The domestication of dogs is essentially a process of delaying maturity. A baby wolf will be as playful with a human as a baby dog is. The difference is the wolf will grow out of it. Domestications comparing the social behavior between dogs and habituated wolves shows that as a wolf ages, it stops looking to a human for guidance. This is a sign that it is still very much a wild animal. Dogs are essentially wolves that never grow out of being a puppy. But domestication isn't limited to other animals. We're animals too, and we've selected for preferential traits in ourselves through hundreds and thousands of years of culture. Culture itself provides a selective pressure, and can result in evolution if it continues for long enough. For example, cultures where milk drinking is continued after weaning have evolved to handle dairy well into adulthood, whereas those who haven't have much higher rates of lactose intolerance. Not all of this is related to human genes, but it's most certainly related to microbial genes, and is therefore still a process of evolution. But back to domestication. Humans too have a prolonged puppy phase as a result of the domestication process. As our societies have grown in size and complexity, aggression and violence have become hindrances to progress, and perhaps diplomacy, amicability, and general coolness have been more favored. We're clearly not there yet, but considering where our ancestors may have been 200,000 years prior, we have come a long way in this regard. Should the selective pressure for this domestication process continue, it's safe to say the process itself will too. So, what would you like to look like? On the outside, there are several characteristic traits of domestications that come up in many of our pets and livestock. Floppy ears, white spots, reduced skulls, smaller teeth, and curly tails. Some of these can hopefully be counted out for humans, at least as a product of domestication, but they might give us a clue as to our future appearance. Compared against archaic humans, we do indeed have flatter faces, smaller teeth, and reduced brow ridges. We are more than just tamed. We are domesticated, and there's no reason to assume that this process will stop. Yet. The better we get along, the more successful we will be as a species. So keep looking out for floppy ears and curly tails in our descendants. Okay, enough about how placid and cute we'll become. Let's talk about our decline in physical robustness. In 2006, a set of 20,000-year-old human footprints were found in Australia that were spaced in a way indicating the person who left them was moving at around 37 kilometers per hour. The technical term for this is full send, as that pace is up there with our fastest Olympic sprinters. Usain Bolt, already a genetic outlier, trained much of his life to run fast and averaged 37 kilometers per hour over 100 meters in expensive shoes on a specialized track. So, if this estimate of the fossil prints is accurate, it suggests that our prehistoric ancestors were routinely capable of physical feats only the top 0.001% of us can accomplish under perfect conditions nowadays. That's a bit disappointing, isn't it? And it suggests also that the less we rely on our physicality for success, the less of it will be left after many generations. Humans today are generally weaker, slenderer, and less mobile than even our most recent ancestors. And if you look at our arboreal predecessors, it gets even more embarrassing. But unlike those cheeky monkeys, we have more complex tongues, higher dexterity in all our important texting fingers, and a wider range of things we can do with our thumbs. Remember though that this isn't a guarantee the trend will continue. In fact, we could become a lot heavier. Yep, as expected, we're getting fatter. The developed world has brought with it a diet rich in all the bad stuff: LDL cholesterol, trans fats, sugar, and so on. And the major causes of death in countries with these diets reflect this: Heart disease, diabetes, and chronic respiratory diseases are all up in the top 5 causes of death, and all of these are comorbidities of obesity and being overweight. This is a bad thing in many ways. But much like the poor mothers who sacrificed their lives in the name of natural selection so that our surviving ancestors could be born healthy, this too is a selective force. If this diet continues for long enough, eventually mutations may arise in the population that allow us to live longer, better, and still reproduce while carrying all this extra goop. Over 1,000 generations, perhaps the fatties will rise up and the human species will equilibrate as one, on a phenotype more commonly associated with marine mammals. What about spacefaring adaptations? Genetic bottlenecks are a process of both genetic drift and selective pressure. And as we move as a species toward the suggestion of sustained human space travel, we have to consider these effects in our future evolution. There's simply no feasible way that we're all going to migrate off a dying planet and set up shop on Mars. The reality is that we'll be left here, slowly evolving to be fatter and more domesticated, and the wealthy elites will jet off to their own inbred colonies with a few of our most attractive breeding stock to dilute the gene pool a bit. But this will create a very significant bottleneck in their genetics, and this will amount to both a process of genetic drift and selection. Here's why. The gene pool on the new Mars colony won't have been selected by any measure of fitness. It was simply a group of people lucky enough to have picked the right numbers on the stock market, or some equivalent stroke of random chance that made them wealthy. It wasn't their genes that got them there, so the genes to draw upon the Mars will be a random selection, but one that doesn't accurately reflect the cross-section of the species either. For one thing, they'll probably be all the same color. So this genetic bottleneck will be a rapid case of genetic drift, with the new population representing a unique and different group than the one they left behind. But the moment they start reproducing, it will also become a selective one. Favorable traits, whatever they may be, will outcompete less favorable ones. And should the low atmosphere and gravity play a role in this, eventually, it's likely the ultimate evolutionary step will eventually occur: speciation. After enough generations of isolation on Mars, growing taller, lankier, grayer, and perhaps more bendy, the humans will have drifted in their genetic makeup so significantly that they will no longer be reproductively compatible with the humans left on Earth. Even the web-footed Dutch would be incapable of sharing their genes with the Martians, and this would make them a new species. It'll be a volatile new market, with unpredictable traits gaining value based on an alien environment, and like any small, isolated portfolio, it'll be extremely vulnerable to both drift and disruption. And frankly, they'd better watch out because we all know what happens to other species of humans when we sapiens get a hold of them. Final thoughts. Evolution isn't an intelligent, directional process. It doesn't build perfection. It simply deletes failure. Whatever's left is just good enough to breed. It's all about passing on genes, after all. It's tempting to intuit that the more we do something, the faster we'll evolve to improve at it. But that's just not how it works. So, while we see people imagining adaptations to better use our phones or arch back from sitting at computers all day long, the only way we'd ever evolve these traits is if they'd somehow made us more successful at breeding. And since being chronically online is associated with less sex, not more, chances are this isn't going to happen. That's all for today, folks. If you hung around this long in our evolutionary journey, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell because history doesn't stop here. Check out our other videos and keep evolving with us. Stay curious, fossil files.